The constant, the dynamic, the corporeal, the spiritual, the meditative, the meandering, the quiet, the restless, the pull, the push, seeking, finding, harmony, the moment, repeat. Congratulations, Vidhya and Kumudha, for choosing to share the wanderings within and allow us all to really partake of the very dichotomous nature of the mind, but also allowing us to reflect a little bit about the wanderings within our own minds. Thank you for that. Congratulations, Souravji, for the beautiful poetry at the beginning. Yeah. Wanderings in the English dictionary, I looked up that word just to kind of get the exact meaning of wanderings. Wanderings is defined as leisurely, aimless travels, journeys from place to place. Wandering in itself, therefore, has a quality of pace, of movement, a sense of the dynamic. What really inspired wanderings? Did Aaj Jaane Ki Zid Na Karo, the song or the poetry, inspire the wanderings? Or were you in a state or in a spirit for wanderings, and then did you find Aaj Jaane Ki Zid Na Karo?
Can you hear me? Yes. You know, isn't it always a little bit of both? We are always wandering. I feel, at least I feel that I'm in constant search of something that is outside of the person that I am, the being that I am. So this wandering is ever constant. But Aaj Jaane Ki is a composition, is a nazm actually that I think had separately inspired both of us from a long time ago. I had first encountered it many years ago when a young Kathak dancer showed it to me to look at it and see how she had worked on it. And ever since, I've been wanting to put it together in some fashion. And then Kumudha came up and asked if we can work on this together. And I said, why not? Let's do this. So in a way, I think they're interspersed.
Absolutely.
You know, it's hard to connect the dots as to when, which, what, where.
Well, interspersed is also the lead motive of this work in many ways. It's impossible to separate the contrasting, the opposing nature of, you know, the many emotions that are sort of tugging and pulling at each other. And really, this was a great experiment, if I may use that word, to really negotiate the spaces within. Kumudha, I thought I'd ask you really about, you know, what has this process of exploration been like for you? Also, I know that, you know, this is Vidhya as your mentor to sort of share space, energy, and also be part of a collaborative process with your mentor right from the beginning, which is, this may not be the right audience, but in the context of Bharatanatyam, to be involved with your mentor right from the ideation stage and to sort of create the work together. So what has that process really been like for you?
The answer really is not a short one, but I will keep it short over here.
Sure.
So for me, it was really as simple as wanting to choreograph this piece for a really long time. And like one of the words in the piece itself, I had been holding it for a while because I felt like I was not ready and there was nothing new to give to this piece. And over the last few years, working with Vidhyaka has kind of opened out channels that, you know, probably were not just as functional before. And I just broached the idea just so casually to her, and she said, oh, this is exciting, this is challenging. I remember these were the words. And it was just that for me. So I think that was the first point of connection. And in terms of working with your mentor, dancing along with her, I think that's probably been the most precious takeaway, the most precious wandering and discovery for me through this journey. And in like very few sentences, I have to say that it's mostly her. The credit is mostly her. There are so much of hierarchy in Bharatanatyam in terms of how you can sit, how you can stand, what you can do, what you cannot do in front of your teacher. And not to say that she doesn't honor any of that. When it needs that work, there is that rigor, there is that holding tight. But it's not constantly reinforced, said, and you know, kind of hanging in front of my face. And I think it's also the other way around. The deep respect that I have for her I feel like I don't have to show it every minute of every day, but I need to have it inside. So I think her understanding this has been really wonderful.
Clearly
for
also
me
a very
to-
emotional process
Yes,
for you,
absolutely.
Kumudha. Yeah, wonderful for this. I also want to ask you a little bit about the word waqt, right? And the whole idea of wanderings is also like to kind of stray and wander, but also for the two of you in the lives that we live to actually sit down, pause, breathe, and then to sort of collect the many wanderings within, articulate them, create music for it, and then to express it. I just want you to, in short, share the process of how, I know it must be a really long process, but then I will also ask Sauravji to comment on the waqt, the waqt aspect that he's sort of worked on, yeah.
Thank you, Akhila. This morning when Javidji was speaking, for I don't know how many of you were here, he recited a poem on waqt.
Yeah.
And he talked about, the leaf.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, how phenomenal
Yeah.
is that? I'm not sure if you all caught that moment
Yeah.
when, time is sort of eternal, but time is also very fleeting. And it's like a leaf being blown away wherever it will go. And we have no option but to follow its course. And time itself, it is past, it is future, it is present, all of that rolled into one. And for me, to answer your question about process, I think when we first looked at this composition, I sort of knew what I did not want to do with it, which is the traditional way that it was sung by Farida Khanum and the idea of the tawaif asking her lover not to go, which is so beautiful in itself, but we wanted to look at this as two parts of one being.
Yeah.
So that much we were clear about. And of course, each of us possess these states of static, dynamic, inward seeking, outward seeking, the introvert, the outspoken, gregarious, all dichotomies, so many more, that exist within each one of us. And we are constantly tugging and pulling between these. We're fighting within, between these two, and trying to understand the other, and also pushing away the other sometimes, even if it is actually something that is good for you. And these wars that exist within us, to find an equilibrium, and by equilibrium I don't mean a balanced midline. To me the line is always curved, it's always mobile, moving. So to find that equilibrium was the goal for the piece. So how we arrived at this, it's hard to put those points, because a lot of it, Chitra Purnima gave us such phenomenal music, and Praveen Sparsh on the ganjira, the percussion, and Bharat on the guitar and mixing. So we worked with them. So the piece was created, the music was created on the choreography. So the ideas, the choreography were set in place, and what was going to happen, and then that jati, the whirlpool jati, which I set based on the idea of being tugged into this whirlpool. We're churned constant. This is an internal churning. So every part of it, I'm giving you a few moments here and there, but every part of it was sort of put together. And then Kumudha brought up these words, the zid and khair that she wanted to focus on, and pehlu as another word. She'll speak about that. But how do we bring those into a coherent statement of the search for the self with the spoken word elements that we had also interspersed? So every part of it was thought through in much detail, after which, during and after which the music was layered over it, and then we went back and forth through several iterations of these. And Sourav, of course, gave us this, we actually sat with him right outside Atagalata and had a conversation on which poetry we can use, and he gave us the meaning of, the real meaning of Aaj Jaane, because as Tamil speaking, I'm Tamil speaking and Kumudha is as well, people, you don't get the nuance behind the words even if you understand it on a very superficial level. So he was there to help us go deep, dive deep into the nazm. And I learned that it's a nazm and not a ghazal. That's the other thing I learned. And then from there, it just moved. And he gave us the poems that, the waqt that he wrote. And
we hear it in his voice as well, right?
Exactly. And that was my desire. I wanted to.
Maybe
he was hesitant, but I wanted him to.
Maybe he can say that, Kumudha, and so we can also you can maybe say those lines, and then you could. Waqt, yeah.
I'm not a performance coach, so I probably won't remember. I might fumble. Waqt kaise? So this first poem, just like Kumudha and Vidhya ka have a mentor and student relationship, learner relationship. The two poems that are used in this piece. The first one, Waqt Kaise Chalta Hai, that is from one of my poems. It's a long piece, Ghadi Saaz Ki Dukaan Par, in the shop of a clockmaker. And those lines are taken from that poem. And the second poem is by my mentor, Kal Chilchilati Dhoop Mein Apne Bachpan Ke Ped Ke Niche Baithunga. So I don't remember the second poem by heart. The first poem I can probably try. Waqt Kaise Chalta Hai, Kya Wah Chalta Hai चक्कर खाता या बिल्कुल सीधा, मसलन लौट कर आते हैं वही दिन तारीखें मगर बीत जाते हैं हम, या वक्त महज एक कैद है सीधी गोल सलाखों वाली. This is the poem that was used.
Thank you so much for that. Kumudha, I wanted to ask you a question really about the word wanderings itself. The beauty of wanderings is, you stray, you go away. But also, in a sense, you always return. You come back. And in that moment, as we saw, you find harmony, breath. And harmony sometimes is also just very fleeting, right? And we're all, in some sense, always attempting to find that. And to articulate that fleeting moment is impossible, right? Like, how do you actually articulate it? Especially put pen to paper and say this, because it's an intangible feeling, it's fleeting. I just want to ask you about, what was it like for you to portray that whatever? And often when I talk to artists, they tell me that this is that fleeting moment when the artist and the audience become one. And that's the moment every artist is looking for. Could you just comment about being able to portray that fleeting moment and find it in your dance, and also find that moment with the audience? What has that been like?
So I have a quick answer about this, with just respect to me, and then also in terms of working with her. So there is this Lord of the Rings thing. I'm sure a lot of people here know it. Not all those who wander are lost. So there's a beauty about wandering and not feeling lost. There is a beauty about knowing that you'll find your feet, knowing that you'll get to a certain point, or not. Will you come back? I don't know. To the same point, maybe. But there is this joy of wandering, but knowing that you're not lost. So this has somehow been a little bit of my spirit for quite some time. So in a sense, for me, there was absolutely no discomfort in the whole process of articulating or choreographing. I just felt very much in my element through this. And with respect to her, but when it translates to performance, when there are others watching, and then this has to translate, this has to get across. It's not just a personal something that you can feel and just indulge. I think that's where somehow, even though the wandering spirit was there, there was still that need to practice, need to fix, need to, are we doing this? Can we do this? And I think that for me, that thing of just like allowing to wander a little bit, saying, it's okay, it'll come, it'll come. I think for me, there was a lot of that I kept getting from her. So in a sense, even though wandering was very much in my spirit, I think I kind of discovered a new thread through that wandering, I think, in terms of executing your ideas.
I also think that in this whole exploration of wanderings that you shared with an audience, I feel like at different points, I think different members of the audience would have sort of connected with you, because it must have spoken to them on so many different levels. Sauravji, I just wanted to ask you a question about, Hindi poetry, finding expression in Bharatanatyam. What was that process like for you? What was it like for you to see this work? I think you saw this work only today. Could you talk to us about what has your response been like to see your poetry and this famous poem being, finding a new language in a certain way?
I have always believed that all arts converge at their highest level. There is no difference between the art forms, and all art takes inspiration from life and nature, and all art is therapeutic in nature. We do art because it makes us feel more human. It gets us connected to ourselves. So art collaborating with each other, poetry and painting, poetry and theater, poetry and dance, and this is something that has been happening for a very long time. Like if you read Natya Shastra, it uses the word Sangeet, which is not music, it's all art together. That idea has always been there. Coming to my poetry being used in a Bharatnatyam, when I told this at home, they were very amused. They were like, you don't end up dancing, whatever you do. So so that was quite amusing and quite humbling, to be very honest, because I have huge respect for Kumudha and Vidhya and the work they do. So it was very humbling and honoring in that sense. The process was that I and Kumudha met several times. We discussed the idea, we polished it. I shared many poems with her, and during the conversations, many poems came up. And I was quite lucky that there is another mentor-student relationship within this performance, me and Sudhir Ranjan Singh, whose second poem we used. So, yeah, it was, and today watching it, even now I'm not able to speak properly because I'm still getting those goosebumps. The performance was so powerful. I was so amazed by it. Yeah.
I just want to...
Akhil, I have a funny little thing to add,
course,
if I may. So when Sourav sent the poems and Chitra Purnima was working on that part of the music track, she said, we wanted a certain draft a certain day because we wanted to finish choreography. So we said, Puni, can you just give it to us today? And she said, Akka, this poetry is very complex. I need some time to pronounce it right. For now, I'll just put Saurav's voice in it and send it to you. And Vidyaka being Vidyaka, when the audio track came, and I just said, Akka, there is Saurav's voice in this, but I know Puni will replace it later. And she just listened to it and she said, you know what, Kumudha, I feel like we should keep Saurav's voice. There is a certain, what is that word? A sense of gravitas. Yeah.
No matter, sorry. I am taking over the mic. No matter how hard a Purni or as Tamil speaking people try to speak in Hindi, inhabiting the words, thank you, inhabiting the words and finding the depth in the language and the meaning and the intense longing that one feels in those words is only going to come either from the author of the poem or someone who's learned it from your mentor, like you said. And to me, the voice actually conveyed just the right sense of that texture and feeling to which we could find movement and expression. So I didn't want to change a thing about it. So that's why, sorry, you had to be in it.
I just want to ask one final question before we probably take a question or two from the audience. Really about, while creating Wanderings Within, static, dynamic, at some point did one become the static, other become the dynamic? What was that process itself, right? I mean, I'm sure, right, you must have gone through the constant dynamic, getting angry, going away, and then feeling a bit lonely and desolate with the other not being present. So there is also like, you're also wandering. There is a sense of wandering that's happening while you're creating Wanderings Within as well. So just talk to us a little bit about that, and then we'll throw it open to the floor.
When you're creating anything, that fear is there, you're wandering anyway. Any composition, whether it's a varnam or something like this, the wandering is real, because unless you wander, you're not going to find that elusive product that you're looking for. It actually, you go there, you think you found it, and it's disappeared again. So that was the case here as well. So every time we felt like we found something, we felt like it was not really there. So that sense apart, I think here, right at the beginning, we said, okay, static and dynamic. And the cliched way to do it would be the older person is the static and the younger, the dynamic, right? And I said, no, why?
Gosh, no.
No,
Why?
absolutely not. So we said, okay, so that was a very basic,
Reversal
switching of roles that we did to start with. But as we navigated through the choreography, as we kept moving along, yes, the challenges were real because this is the first time I'm working with a student, someone who is mentoring under me. And I wanted to do that. And someone who is never happy in my comfort zone, I constantly like to be thrown out of it. So this was definitely that for me, one such experience where I was thrown out of my comfort zone in terms of negotiating those pathways where you are collaborating, but you are setting the whole arc of the piece in place and understanding where the ideas work and where they don't work. And Kumudha was she was actually wonderful through this process because she understood where it was necessary to say, you've had this experience, so I agree. Let's go with this, right? So, and then when there were ideas that she brought in that I felt were really valuable, there were so many moments. So it's very hard to pick apart and say this was that. So when I felt that it really worked beautifully, I said, yes, let's go with that. But for the most part, I think it's not about, we all were born at a certain time. I just happened to have been born earlier and have danced longer or whatever. So it is somewhere you gather, those leaves and you sort of understand how to work with something instinctively. And that process takes you along. This was definitely a challenge to choreograph with someone. But now to come to the dancing part, that was more challenging for me because I have always been a solo artist. I've always only danced alone. I've only learned alone from my guru. So dancing with someone else, it was, I think, even the idea of touching, and the idea of physical contact is something that is a challenge.
I noticed that, yeah.
Yeah, and the way you engage with the other body, two bodies engaging with each other in movement or expression.
The chemistry.
Is very challenging,
Yeah.
is very challenging for me because I am primarily a solo artist. So, and the third thing I will say is that as a solo artist, I think I'm at this point where a lot of my performances wander. So when it's not always set, the choreography, especially if it's an expressional piece, it's not completely set. And if there are live musicians, there's all the more wandering because we allow each other to go where they feel like on that day. So that is another thing that was a challenge here because when you're dancing with someone else, you can't just go, you can't do a some other adavu or you can't, do some wander. So that was another challenge that I faced. But I think to answer your question, the static and the dynamic, I'm not sure if they exchanged places ever. Do you remember specifically or?
I don't think there were any places really. Yeah, sure. I actually have not much to add to what Vidhya said, except I think the only constant here was the wandering. So in a sense, the moment you kind of put it in two corners or two boxes, it wouldn't work. So I think to just let it free, even in the way we exchange ideas and thoughts, it was not one way. And again, I'm saying this not to, kind of make her happy or anything like that, but yeah. No, it's not to make her happy, but there is a genuine safe space that was created in coming forward and saying, no, Akka, I feel like this is not enough. I feel like, I feel like this needs this, or something like that, and to just say it very authentically, or to say, I have an idea, and I really think this sits. So even the tone of how I could share ideas with her, it was constantly, at one point I was like, you do it, I'll follow. So there was, all of this, and I think that was what was beautiful. Every day was different. Every day our conversations were different, and how we interacted was different. And even with Sourav, the 2 poems that he gave us, one of them was totally trapped in time. The other one was completely free in the air. So even to take 2 poems like that and to make them work into the same piece was something. And the piece itself wandered between us, to him, to the musician, to Praveen, who created the rhythmscape, back to Purnima, to the guitar. We used a new instrument, an atypical instrument. So I think the piece itself wandered between all the collaborators.
And then to the audience.
And then
of
to the
course.
audience, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was also about, I wish I could ask you a question about how the wanderings within is also a sort of deeply spiritual, because it's really also a celebration of, a sort of sense of acceptance, of really recognizing that what we have now is the now. And on that note, on a very positive note.
That is why I chose to end it with Aaj, because the composition provides it so beautifully. Sourav gave us the Kal poem, and Kal is yesterday, Kal is tomorrow, but we're always in the yesterday or the tomorrow. And
Who knows, right?
Yeah.
So what we have now is,
Janaki Aaj, right? So then I said, okay, let's end with the Aaj, the now, the present. This moment, this breath is all that matters.
So thank you for this moment, and thank you to the Bengaluru Poetry Festival for giving us this moment. If the audience has any questions, I'm sorry, I believe we do not have time for questions. Thank you so much, Vidhya, Kumudha, Sourav ji. And I think we have another performance, but I'll let Sharanya announce.